which we will somehow come through. All right, so we are on page AyinBase 17, and it's 8 lines from the top, as I see it. The line begins kulhi. And the whole length of the discussion, all the way to this point, is to point out the phenomenon that oir always remains me'ein ha'etzem, reflective of the aspect of the etzem, even though it goes through a tzimtzum and so forth, and it acquires an acknowledgement, so to speak, a relationship to world. Nevertheless, it is still me'ein ha'etzem, because of the phenomenon that it oir, in addition to its own unique quality, it also has the quality of dveikus, that it says dovug to its source. Thus, the source is what the oil represents. That's what, in whatever form, in whatever level, it still represents the source, and therefore it is anyan atzmi, because the source is etzem. Okay, now, v'agam de b'tei ro'er pasha v'yero. Divaramasel posach Eliyahu. Even though that in Tei ro'er posach Eliyahu kosov, there he writes the inyan ha-tzimtzum hu, that the phenomenon of tzimtzum is bechinas hefsek yeiser me'inyan ha-parsa. Then the inyan of parsa, there are two types. Very, very briefly, there are two types of interruptions of the oil, so to speak, in order to bring it down to a lower level. One is called a parsa, one is called a tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means a contraction of the oil, reduction of the oil, of the clarity of the oil. Parsa is a different inyan. Parsa is a receptacle for the oil to give the oil a different kind of orientation within the parsa. The parsa is a receptacle for the oil. So it explains that the tzimtzum is a greater interference, so to speak, than the parsa. Very briefly, because in the parsa situation, the very essence of the oil that is above the parsa, mislabesh behaparsa, is imbued into the parsa. Again, I don't think we're going to go into the details on these inyanim here. Nevertheless, it would be helpful just to understand certain concepts that are brought in here. And the emphasis over here is that in the parsa comes mehuz ha'oir, not just some kind of a gilu, some kind of a ha'ora, but mehuz ha'oir, the very reality of the oir. That is above the parsa, mislabesh beha parsa, is imbued and comes through the parsa. The principle of mehus, which I believe is important to ultimately get some kind of a relationship to, mehus, in our terminology, this would be like the reality of something. Like we give the example, anything in the world. If you have a table. A table consists of a certain form and a certain parts and so forth. And after that, the parts are put together in that form, it becomes a new reality. It's called a table. This reality of the table is of a different quality totally than its components that put it together. Primarily the difference is that the components that put it together have no reality. Whereas the entity itself is very real. It actually carries the spirit, so to speak, of the nefesh ha'odam, a human quality. That's called mahus ha'oir. So the parsa does not interrupt the oir, the mahus ha'oir, in essence. It just contains it. So in the parsa, there's mahus ha'oir shalaman ha'parsa mislamish ba'parsa ma she'ein kein inyan ha'tzimtzum. Whereas the union of tzimtzum, who bechinas hisamos ha'oir ve'adori, there the principle of tzimtzum is hisamos ha'oir, the concealment, tzimtzum of the oir ve'adori, and its absence. Which is a much deeper effect. You remove the oil completely. That's in the tzimtzum. Like we said, after the tzimtzum there is a mokim pong. Hainu, and he explains, why is it that in the parsa there is the mahuz ha'oir? In the parsa there is mahuz ha'oir, whereas in the tzimtzum it is a complete concealment. Hainu, and the principle in this is the be'er in lifnei hatzimtzum. The parsa is all taking place before the tzimtzum. In the oir is lifnei hatzimtzum. Mitzad malas ha'oir. I'm saying the tzimtzum is applied to the oir is lifnei hatzimtzum. And the tzimtzum applied to oil tzimtzum, and then comes a different kind of oil that can go down into world. But initially, this is oil lifnei tzimtzum. So this oil lifnei tzimtzum, mitzad malas ha'oil, due to the very supremacy of the oil, if that oil would be accepted and brought forth in his hislabshus manner, even though it's mislabish, like in the parsa, there is some container for it. But hislabshus may be a parsa, like in the case of the parsa, that there is some kind of a container for it. Nevertheless, even though it's a hislabshus, but because of the supreme quality of the oil itself, lo yiyeh. Then that would not effectuate that should be an oil that is in proximity to world, because there is this fundamental truth, mahus, in the oil, and his slapshus will not alleviate, so to speak, eliminate that profound truth, and it would not therefore have a shachas to oilness. Kim davke only alidei his abus v'heder ha'oir, only as a result of removing the oil, then it is possible to bring the oil into a state where it has a proximity to world.
Are we saying that?
But
Are we saying that if it would dress up in the parsa before the tzimtzum harishon, then that would result.
That would not
Result.
That would not present an oida b'shachas oilams. We can, again, they presented that earlier, we can point to the principle that is expressed here from the mushalim that we've had. Like we said before, a table comes down in the gashmis. Initially, the table is some kind of a neshama. Then it comes down in Gashmius, and it's mislabish in a physical structure. Despite the fact that it's mislabish in a physical structure, it still carries with it a supreme human quality. It never loses that element. It doesn't become a physical entity. And it is readily recognizable that the principle of the table, even though it has a physical function, nevertheless it still retains its spiritual significance. Meaning to say that when a person eats by a table, it is not only that merely that the table serves him well, it makes it more convenient to eat. Put the plate down and more convenient. There is a superior human quality in it. So it does not, once you have the mahus oir, it does not dissipate, it does not reduce totally, even if it's mislabish in a cake. This is why, when we talked about oil absorption, if nehat tzimtzum, the parsa would not serve its ultimate purpose. The parsa comes a much later, at a much further down the line. Me'atzilus libiyah. It comes from atzilus into biyah. Liyes, being that the klal was ha'oir. That from Atzilus to Biyah, the oil that comes from Atzilus to Biyah is in general the oil Hushanim that Lefiera Ha'oilim. This is already the oil that was measured, which means Atzilus to Biyah, the oil in Atzilus is mislabish in Kalim. In Atzilus we have 10 spheres, the oil is mislabish in Kalim, even though it's oil of Atzilus. Nevertheless, of course, that it's mislabish in Kalim. Kalim means that there's identities, as far as functional identities to the oil. It is not an oil that is exclusively representative of Etzem Holocaust. There's a functional element in the oil itself. Once there comes to the point where in the oil can be identified oil that has a shachas to oil, a functional, there the oil can be mislabish. That this oil should actually be transformed and contained in a different format. And then, as a result of this oil be mislabish in the parsa, then the oil becomes be'erech. In proximity, it can relate to Bria Tzirasir. Biyah and Atzilus are vastly different. But although Atzilus is also oir in Keili, in other words, as I said, there's a functional identity in the oil as a result of the slapshas in the Keili. Like we said, Chochma, Bina, Das, and so forth. But there, the Keili is only to identify the oil. It does not have a presence of its own. This Atzila. Atzilus is completely embraced, illuminated by the oil that's higher with oil HaKeser. So therefore, when this oil, in order for it to come down into Biyah, into Bria Tzir Asir, what is the difference? Bria Tzir Asir, Bria means a creation, where there is the presentation of a new present, a new entity. Atzilus is not a new entity. Atzilus is still pointing and representing its source, the Keser. It is contained within the Keser. If I were to give a kind of a handle on this, Atzilus versus Biyah, Bria Tzir Asir, it would be something like this. You have a home, and in the home there's furnishings, there's tables and chairs. Although the tables and chairs have their identifiable function, but while they are in the home, they lose their individual presence, and they are imbued with the home element. They actually lose their individual presence. When you take the table, if the table stands in a showroom, for example, then it is exclusively a table. It doesn't have that superior. In the showrooms, they actually create an ambience, so to speak, a presentation, giving you an idea of how the table fits into a home environment. Because there it's much richer than when it is on its own. Biyah, this is how the Inyanim are. They are on a present and individual presence level, not contained within an overall reality. Must be a creation. So in order that it should be able to relate to Bria Tzir Asiyah, this principle of Biyah has this level. We can readily see, because we discussed it recently, completely yesterday and so forth, in Asiyah. In Asiyah we said, Asiyah, when it comes to doing, you can't build a table. You have to attend to its components as a standalone entity, even though you are actually intending to build a table, but the intent of the table, the mahus of the table, is concealed. You're actually attending to its components. This is how it is in Asiyah, in action, and in Bria, and in Yitzir also. Therefore, the union of Atzil, the oil Atzil should come into Biyah. It has to go to this parsa. But when it comes to the parsa, then it becomes Verech Biyah. Even though Atzilus and Biyah are very, very different, very distant from each other. Sure. Huh? Parsa. Parsa means a curtain. So when the oil of Atzilus comes to the parsa, mislavish in the parsa, then the resultant oil is be'erech or biyah. Then you could identify, so to speak, as you said, the functional element independently of the overall reality. V'yesh bozeh maila. Okay, so now we have two types of principles that work against the oil, so to speak, and they each have some kind of an influence on the oil, effect on the oil. One is called the parsa, and one is called tzimtzum. The difference is that in parsa, the oil, the whole entire oil, is mislavish, but it is mislavish in something that reduces its brightness. It doesn't reduce the oil itself. In tzimtzum, there is an actual reduction of the oil. So we're saying that it's the oil from Atzilus coming into Biyah comes to the parsa, which means that it is the very oil, the mahus of the oil, the way it's in Atzilus. This is what comes through into in Biyah. In this function, in this process, there is a special maila, there is a supremacy. The fact that his havos, the creation, comes through the process of his slapshus hamahus, where you have the mahus itself, the very reality of the oil, mislabish in the parsa. There is a mila. What is a mila? The mila that is a mahus. As explained elsewhere, there is a mila because you have the mahus. Ava behagilo ishal ha'oil. So there, the mila is that you have the mahus, the very reality of the oil itself. That comes to the parsa. Ava behagilo ishal ha'oil. But if you were to focus in and attend to the gilui, the identifiable element of the oil, yesh behagilui shal dehatzimtzum ma'ilok deil gaben haparsa. There, the gilui that comes through as a result of the tzimtzum, there's a greater quality relative to the parsa. Okay, so just to summarize, to capture what we're talking about. There are two ways that the oil can be affected to come down to a lower level. One is called the parsa, one is called the tzimtzum. The phenomena, the processes are quite different. In the parsa, the entire truth, the entire reality of the oil is mislavish. Mislavish means that it is imbued, and it comes through some kind of a reducing element, a concealing element, a parsa. But what is contained therein is the mahus, is the reality of the oil itself.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Can we say that, like a garment, it conceals the person's body, but reveals his personality, which is maybe like the truth of him?
All right, maybe, but it's too premature now to talk in that terms. So
Okay.
in the parsa there's said mehus ha'oir, but it is behislapshus in the parsa, which means it is fully contained in the parsa. You don't have the brightness of the oil. In the tzimtzum,
The whatness of the oil?
the brightness.
Oh, the brightness.
In the tzimtzum is a different process. So he says, "Behagilui shel hoyer." When we talk about the gilui, the expression of the hoyer, yesh behagilui shel tzimtzum ma'ila gdeila. In the gilui that comes of the tzimtzum, there's a great ma'ila legabe inyan haparsa. In comparison to the inyan of the parsa. What is the special ma'ila through the tzimtzum? The tzimtzum is an actual tzimtzum, the actual removing of the oil, whereas in the parsa you have the whole mahus. So how is it that in the gilui there is a ma'ila in the tzimtzum relative to the parsa? So he explains, "Hislapshus beha parsa," because the inyan of hislapshus, the way the oil is mislabish, imbued in the parsa, hu inyan akova. This is the principle of akova. Akova means being contained and establishing residency. So let's make akova. Not just passing through, but establishing its place, its identifying itself with that place. That's meant akova. Shohei misaki b'haparsa. Well, the oil actually misaki means it takes residency. It's a good way of expressing it. It's not just passing through in a rush, but it actually relates to the place where it is. It's meant misakiv. Who, and that's the principle of akova. The effect of akova is she'oir mizhave kimhus hadova shemisakiv bay. That the oil is affected and becomes like the mahus of that thing in which it is misakif. Like we say, if taking up residency, even though it's a very same person that moved from Europe to America, it's a very same person. But once he decides he's not just visiting, but he decides that he is going to settle in, he ultimately acquires qualities that are quite different. Natures are quite different than he came with. After a while, he becomes an American, which is a different personality completely. That's not hakova. Even though it's the very same person, the mahus of the person is there, but the akova has this profound effect that he actually acclimates to the place where he is misakif. Ve'alkein, and therefore, nikra ha'oyer she'achar ha'parso, the oil that is received after the parsa is referred to b'shem oil shel tulda, by the term of oil shel tulda, a secondary oil. Tulda means something that is born from something else. Oil shel tulda, a reflected oil. Like we have the moon is reflecting the solar light. It is the very light of the sun, but it's a different Mahus, because it's Misakif in the moon. And now what's produced is, say, this is moonlight, this is not sunlight. Even moonlight and sunlight are identical things. This is the light, this is sunlight. But it becomes so acclimated to the moon that it's now called moonlight. And it has different Mahus completely. This is the effect of the parsa. Because in the parsa there is akova. In other words, he comes to a place and he likes it, and he says, "Okay, this is the way. This is what I relate to." Whereas when it comes, as we're going to see, when it comes to the tzimtzum, yes, he's reduced, but he does not acquire the qualities and the nature of the place where he's coming from, because I know he slaps us. See, now we have to interrupt. It's a long davening.